Take a look around lively old London, buzzing crowds, we sweat and we revel, red-cheeked shouts and songs in the flicker of the gaslight. Eager blighty bursts from the cobblestones.
Well, there's also a little interesting part of the soundtrack. It's a song called Underground. And It seems like you've got a soloist singing, supported by a chorus of men. I don't know if it's like gang members or assassins or the London public rebelling against against the leaders. It kind of feels like your version of the Misty Mountains from The Hobbit. You know what I mean? It's like this melancholic yet determined mission statement. So, what can you tell us about that song?
Well, so by the time this is, public, by the time this airs, I suppose, I will have announced that my big surprise collaboration on this project was with Tripod, your Melbourne superstars, where after we did This Gaming Life, well, so as context for someone who has no idea what I'm talking about,
This Gaming Life.
The Melbourne Symphony approached me more than a year ago and said, we want to jointly commission you and Tripod to write an evening-length show. They originally approached Tripod and said, we want you guys to do a show that's entirely about video games and your relationship with gaming and all of that, accompanied by the full might of the Melbourne Symphony as part of the Melbourne Comedy Festival. And they immediately said, that sounds amazing, we would love to do that, but we need a collaborator for the orchestral side of that, because we're songwriters, but we don't have experience with orchestration or anything like that. And so Melbourne Symphony said, we know just the guy, and they reached out to me, and they it's like mating in captivity. They just sort of put us together. They said, we have this idea, and we think both of you would make the good, halves of this equation.
It's a very evocative image.
Yeah, well, it's true, because we were all, but it's like, or how about this? It's an arranged marriage that worked out beautifully. Because they were thinking in terms of, what's the best, who are the best individual constituent elements? Now let's just hope they like each other.
Yeah.
Well, within the first 15 seconds of that first Skype conversation, we were finishing each other's sentences. I mean, we absolutely hit it off as well as I've ever hit it off with anyone. And I also loved their songwriting. They're not like witty lyricists and generic musicians. They are excellent musicians and excellent lyricists both. And that's not common amongst comedy songwriters, because comedy songwriters tend to be about the lyrics.
Yeah.
And so we did this whole show, and you were there, and
yes.
and it was one of the most spectacularly wonderful experiences I've ever had in my life. It was a really, really just unlike any kind of collaboration. I'd never done a project like this where we're writing
comedy and music and gaming and orchestra
and a grand orchestral approach to comedy, where it's not really like, there's some very kind of baseline slapstick humor, but most of it's not. Most of it's actually quite clever, which I chalk entirely up to them. And I was trying to let the orchestra reflect that, but it's, and there's also heart in the show. We wanted to make moments that were actually really like real, and really shed light on why gaming matters to us, and the kinds of moments in our lives that gaming can have, and the significance that it can have in those moments, and all of that. And I was really proud. I am very proud of what we did, because I really felt like I can honestly say I've never done anything like this before. And I'm sure we didn't invent a category, and I'm sure people have done their versions of things like this before, but I'd never been to a show like this.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to perform it a lot more with them. But point being, as we were finishing it, we were in this like postpartum depression of like, how do we stop working together? We've gotten really used to Skyping with each other, once a week or every few days for the past year. And we had fallen into this rhythm that we loved, and we were so happy. It's like you complete me. How can I stop? And so, by total luck, right as the project was nearing its finish, I flew up to Canada for a meeting on Assassin's Creed, and we were going to be talking about the score. And when I got there, the audio director, Lydia Andrew, said, "So I have a curveball to throw at you." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And she said, "The game is going to be loaded to the brim with source music. And so there's going to be folk songs and hymn tunes and all sorts of things like that being performed all throughout London. And there's an entirely separate music production team that is, hiring musicologists to authentically research all of those songs and make sure that they were things that were actively being performed in Victorian London, and research the manner by which they're performed and what kind of instruments and singing styles that they would be performed in, all that kind of thing, which is not uncommon. AC has always prided itself in its research, you know? And so, and Black Flag was a big one specifically musically for that, because the sea shanties thing, that was a big part of the success of that game, was people really loved that element. And so they were saying, London gives us an opportunity to revisit this idea of the game having a lot of music throughout, because our audio director, Lydia, she's from London. She grew up there, and she said, growing up, there's music everywhere, and people sing in the streets, and it's always in, there's taverns and things. And these are traditions that go back hundreds of years, and the English are very devoutly proud of their traditions. So she really wanted to bring that to the game. So her idea, her curveball, was, there's this subgenre of folk music called the murder ballad. And there are ballads, kind of like Grimm's fairy tales, that were much darker than when we think of a modern fairy tale. The murder ballad was a very popular 19th century genre that are basically just songs about like famous criminals or famous horrible events and things like that. And they're folk songs about dark things, basically. And she said they're very popular at the time. And so she said, what if we write original murder ballads that are meant to pass themselves off as contemporary music, as if it's being composed by some anonymous guy in a tavern somewhere who is noticing that there are these pair of hooded, mysterious figures that are doing things around town and no one knows who they are, but they're kind of manipulating the balance of power and the status quo, because there's a big theme in this game of the Industrial Revolution creating this kind of underclass of people as bankers and politicians all kind of try to get sort of crony capitalist, and they're taking advantage of child labor and things like that. And there's a recurring theme throughout the game of kind of this early Industrial Revolution era greed. And that's a big thing of what Jacob and Evie are fighting against. So she said, what if people are noticing that these people that there's this two people that are kind of anonymous that are doing these acts, and some anonymous composer starts to write about that. That is someone alive then. She said, how would you like to write half a dozen or so original songs that will be heard in the game and recorded as part of the separate source music production crew that's recording all these famous folk tunes and things? Well, your job is to deliver us sheet music that they can then go do their own versions of in the same style as all the other stuff they're doing. But we're as if it's coming from the era. And I was like, oh my God, no one has ever asked me to do something like this. That sounds amazing. And she said, now what do you think about lyrics? And I said, I'm not a lyricist. I said, every time I write lyrics, it takes me 5 times longer than it should, because I don't like most lyrics, because most of them I find cheesy, and they're either too on the nose or they're too abstract, or it's just, for whatever reason, I have apparently picky taste with lyrics. So I said to her, I have the solution though. I need you to hire some collaborators for me, and I know the perfect 3 people. And so I sent them some excerpts from This Gaming Life, and I said, look, here's the thing. This is nothing like the music that we're going to write. But I want you to appreciate the poets that these guys are. And so they were very quick to embrace this idea, and so we set about writing 6. The 6th is the most atypical, which is the one you asked about, which is Underground, because this finally is heard towards the end of the game, and it's the one that takes the longest view, and it's kind of summarizing the game in general, and it kind of almost serves almost like an end credit song of sorts.
That would work.
It's almost like an anthem for the game. But the other 5 are very much following very specific plot moments in the game. And so the funny thing was, because these recordings were all being done to be like like drunkards on the streets or people in a piano bar or whatnot. I said, I'd sure like to have kind of like a nice album version of these songs. So I went into the studio with Tripod and they performed these songs. And so what's on the soundtrack album are the Tripod renditions of the songs that are not in the game.
Oh, okay,
What's in the game is different, with the exception of Underground. Underground is in the game, but I'm not going to say how because that'd be a big spoiler.
Okay.
That one's in, but that's the only one that is. The others are all heard by totally different singers and in different arrangements and things. But the ones on the album are Tripod, and they're arrangements that I produced. And I should say also, the original concept was I was just going to write melodies and they were going to write lyrics. But then they started coming up with melodic ideas, and then and I was loving those ideas that they were coming up with. So we would start kicking things back and forth. But then at one point, I mean, like in the case of Underground, I wrote out all the music to that, sent it to them. They wrote the lyrics, and then we massaged it, and their lyrics left me completely breathless. I was blown away by what they wrote. But then there's another song that's the diametric opposite of that. That's called Jokes, 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 and it's absolutely so fantastic. And I say that because that was one that they got an idea in their head, and so they said, let's just write this quickly and send it to Austin. So they sent me basically a full song of and a demo of them singing it with lyrics and melody and everything. And I was like, guys, I have no comment. This is like perfection. So that song is, to me, it's one of the most special ones in the collaboration, because it's actually entirely them. I lay no claim to any of that song other than being the kind of producer who says thumbs up. Let's put it in the game just like this. Because they're brilliant. So anyway, another long answer. I'm sorry, but
don't need to apologize.
Well, I hate to be so long-winded, but I can't stop talking about those guys because it's such devout romance.
And you guys did put on an amazing show, one of the best shows I'd seen this year and probably in a long time.
It's a lot, and it was a lot of work, and it's just an absolute honor to do with them. And now we're like, okay, what are we gonna do next?
Well, we look forward to that.
Jokes, 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 and there's daggers and there's cloaks, but behind the scenes the leading players differ on the plot. Laugh, laugh, laugh at the dandy's new red scarf. Now 8 shows a week to Beelzebub is his eternal lot. Jokes, 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 make 'em laugh until they choke, fairly slay 'em in the aisles. Bates Fair and Princess Charming, thrills, 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 dashing feats and bloody spills, and I guarantee you'll never see the ending coming.
But one of the good things you mentioned about this gaming life is there's a lot of heart and why you guys love music. And one of the best moments, the best side moments emotionally, was you performed a little surprise rendition of Journey with the orchestra. And it's very hard to talk about your work with video games without mentioning Journey. Because it was like you were nominated for a Grammy when it released in 2012, and then it's got re-released for the PS4 this year. And, I've had my own personal emotional reactions and connections to the game and to the soundtrack. When I finished the game, I bawled my eyes out. I'm not even joking. I bawled my eyes out.
It means a lot, man. It was such a personal project that as much as it still to this day bewilders me when anyone says that, it's at the same time I'm like, well, I don't know that I could have given any project more of myself than I did on that one. You try to do that on every time, but Journey was my kind of game as a gamer. Like, it was one of those that when Genova Chen, the creative director and co-founder of that game company, first pitched the idea to me, which was now 6.5 years ago, I said, I've been waiting my whole life as a gamer for someone to make this game. This is a game that I want to exist. And I'm completely dumbfounded at the luck that I get to be a part of making it. But even if I weren't, I would be thrilled, because this is a game that I want to play.
Yeah.
So it's very touching when anybody is able to internalize it and make it so personal to themselves in that way, because it was a very personal, creative process for us making it.
And you still get people who come and tell you about their own personal experiences and emotional connections with the game to this day?
Almost every single day.
Wow.
I mean, at one point it was dozens per day. And then, now that it's been 3 years, it's trickled down to the astonishingly still steady rate of, honestly, I rarely go a day without getting a message of some kind, whether it's on Facebook or my email or on Twitter. And that's part of what I love about these things, especially Twitter, is how easily I'm able to communicate and interact with people. And when people say to me all the time, "Oh, thank you so much for responding." Like, I'm shocked that you answered my fill in the blank tweet, email, whatever. And I'm like, if I wasn't interested in that, I don't understand why I would have an account, because that's the point of this. To me, it's not interesting to just spew a bunch of stuff out onto the internet and hope that people think it's cool and then just watch them consume it. I'm like, no, I want to have a dialogue, and I like talking to people, and I like seeing what they're interested in. And if I put something out that people don't like, I like to know about that as well. That's intriguing to me, and maybe I can even learn and grow from that, and all these sorts of things. And so to me, that interactive process with the audience and with my colleagues and all of that, it's one of the many sort of hallmarks of why I consider it's a hallmarks of this era we're living in, which I feel very strongly is the best era to be a composer in all of human history by far. And so it was my idea to Tripod. I said, I'd love if we could incorporate Journey, because to the extent that my name is used in the marketing of this show, because Tripod are obviously very well known in Australia, and so it's their show. But at the same time, I know that the Melbourne Symphony was keen to kind of name drop me a little bit as part of the marketing, and I said the degree to which that would work is the degree to which people are familiar with Journey. Because that's going to be, if I'm a draw, it's going to be because people responded to Journey. That's just the simple truth of the matter. And so I said it would be nice to acknowledge that fact by incorporating Journey into the show. So then it developed in this whole concept of like, well, what if they do this whole bit about, we want to write games, and where we were, back in the 80s and 90s, we were aspiring game composers. And so we worked out, and they had this whole bit of, an 8-bit piece and then a 16-bit piece. And I actually went to friends of mine who do 18 and 16-bit music and had them make those tracks for us, so that they're like the 8-bit track Drive King was done by Chipsol, the composer behind Super Hexagon.
Fantastic.
Who she writes on an actual Game Boy. And those are fully real 8-bit sounds, off a chip, not an emulator. And so she provided us with Drive King. They wrote the piece as a piano sketch, and then I sent it to her, and she cooked it up, this brilliant 8-bit version of it that I told her, I said, make this bad, make it cheesy, because the whole point is that I'm going to get a little snarky and say, okay, now can we maybe listen to some real game music, and I'll play Journey, and that was kind of the shtick.
Oh, brilliant.
But then the part that I loved was that they then get me back by running out in bed sheets and kind of like spoiling the whole thing,
that was hilarious to watch.
Bed and white bed sheets and doing a little Journey ballet. And we actually had a whole bit we cut from the show where they give me creative feedback on Journey, where we start playing Nascence from the opening track on the album, which is kind of the Cross Media Bar, the main theme. And I had written all these extra parts in so that they were able to we start playing it. It starts with the cello solo like you hear on the album. And then they're like, it's boring. It needs a beat, doesn't it? So then they point at the timpani player and they're like, can you do something? I had written a timpani part. So then the guy just starts playing his timpani part, and it's immediately like, well, this kind of sounds like Journey, but that timpani sure is out of place. But they're loving it, and they're like, this is great. Now, what if we do this? And I added all this stuff up where once we bring in the whole orchestra, it's just a complete mess, and it sounds awful. But you can still hear Journey kind of poking its head through, and that's when I would then stop at the orchestra and say, guys, like, I don't want to impose, but maybe let's just listen to it once all the way through the way I did it, and then give me your notes or whatever. And then that was going to be the point at which I'd play Apotheosis.
Yeah.
And we go to intermission, and we even rehearsed it with the orchestra and everything, but the show was running long, and it was we're not sure this is as funny as, we wanted the show to just be one great segment after another, so we got a bit brutal cutting a few things. And I'm glad we cut it, but it was a really fun idea, at least, to rehearse.
Awesome.
Because I said, I want to be involved. Anytime I'm a part of the show, I would love for it to be at my expense, because conductors are so often portrayed as very serious and unfun. Like, music making is not joyous and fun, it's serious art. Conductors tend to be the epitome of the classical musician mindset, that music is a serious study, and no amount of taking it seriously is too much. And I'm of the mind that, look, I take it extremely seriously, but I also take having fun seriously, and those two can come together so beautifully in music. Why shouldn't we? And so I said, I really want to be the butt of the joke as often as possible in the show. And so they were very gracious to make fun of me frequently.
Oh, it's amazing. And if you've ever been to a John Williams live show with the Philharmonic, he is awesome up there on the podium.
He is, but he is like I'm talking about, though. He's not a comedian. You know what I mean? Like, he'll have moments where he'll make a little joke here and there, but it's usually funny, because it's otherwise so comedy starved of an event. Like, for example, because I've seen him on stage many times, 10 times or more. And I once went to a show, it was an outdoor show at the Hollywood Bowl, where a low-flying helicopter was hovering over the concert for a good few minutes.
Oh, wow.
And it was really annoying, because it was really loud, and they're supposed to be, they're playing some delicate, like E.T. or something, or Yoda's theme or something, it's like quieter. And John Williams turns and says to the microphone, like, I wish that helicopter were pitched to B flat or something like that. And it's like, it was hilarious because it was the only joke that night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm not saying he's like this unfun person.
Yeah.
I mean, I've met him and he's very polite, but I imagine amongst his actual friends, I'm sure he's a multidimensional person, but his stage presence is definitely much more in that tradition of music making is kind of a solemn and beautiful and serious act. And my hero in that way is Leonard Bernstein, who always looked like he was having the time of his life on the podium. And he could perform Mahler with joy.
That's awesome.
That to me that's the winning combination.
Well, moving into the realm of films, you've done so many films that it's hard to cover all of them in a single interview. So let's just focus in on one of your recurring collaborations with Jordanian-American filmmaker Amin Matalqa. So you guys, began working together with Captain Al-Bara in 2008, then Strangely in Love in 2012/14. I'm never sure what the date is there. And now you're in post-production for your third go-around, which is The Rendezvous. And you guys are very good friends from anyone who follows you on social media. So, how did that all come about? When did you guys start working together and meeting together and becoming friends?
Yeah, he's my best friend. He's my brother. I mean, he really is. We've shared some major life experiences, very across the spectrum of very difficult experiences and really wonderful experiences. And we first met in 2006, almost 10 years ago, when we were both students. And he was a student at the American Film Institute. And his thesis short film was called Morning Latte, and he was looking for a composer. And he emailed the USC film scoring program, where I was a student at the time.
Yeah.
And all the composers got that email, but his email was exploding with, obvious passion for film music in a way that is above and beyond the average director. Directors all obviously have varying appreciations of film music, because it's one of the constituent elements of their macro job of directing.
Yeah.
It's one of the department heads that they hire alongside cinematographer and editor and the whole nine yards. But whereas some filmmakers, really relish the visual language, and so cinematographers are their heroes. And then for others, they come from maybe an editing background, and so editors are their heroes. Or some of them are maybe, like George Clooney I mentioned earlier, he came from an acting background, so for him, I would imagine, performance is a very special thing that he pays very close attention to when he's directing. And that sort of, everyone has kind of their pet element or pet elements. And for Amin, it's undoubtedly the music, and so much so that we always joke that he only makes movies so that we can hurry up to post-production and he can then start the scoring process, because that's the only thing he cares about.
Sounds like Brad Bird talking about Michael Giacchino. It's amazing.
I think of him like Spielberg in that sense, because he very much like Spielberg, he designs large swaths of his films to depend on the music from the script stage. The script will explain what is going to be happening here, and you'll realize that scene is going to rely on the score. Like, it better be good. It better understand the goal of the scene, because it's going to be the main way that the goal of that scene is communicated. And he's a big fan of that, and that's not very common in today's day and age. A lot of especially independent filmmakers, really both. Whether you're talking about big Hollywood blockbusters or independent filmmakers, you don't find a lot of directors that lean on the music and have been planning on it from the earliest days of pre-production.
Yeah.
The way someone like Spielberg does. Like, when you think about, there are certain sequences in Spielberg's films where he knew in advance, I'm counting on John Williams knocking this out of the park here, because if he doesn't, the scene won't work. But of course, John Williams always has. Think of like that first, like the arrival on the island of Jurassic Park is a great example. If you take away the music, this is B-roll of a helicopter flying over lovely mountains.
Yeah.
There's nothing intrinsically exciting about it, unless just other than, the basic, which is beautifully captured, but it's not, the visual splendor of that movie is all about what's to come.
Yeah.
They're all about, you're going to see dinosaurs in a few minutes. And everyone in the theater is awaiting that, and the anticipation of that is what that scene is about. And the music is the sole carrier of that flag. And he knew that going in, and he's like, well, of course, but John Williams is a genius, so that's not a problem. And Amin, he directs similarly, where I'll read the script and we workshop the script together, and even like on Strangely in Love, all the table reads with the cast were done in my studio, and so it was very much like a homebrew production. And Strangely in Love is a tiny, tiny, tiny micro independent film that we just made because we were waiting on another project to get started. Interestingly, The Rendezvous overtook that other project, and that one will now probably be the next film that we do. But it was like, look, let's not sit on our hands. Let's just make a movie. And so, everybody just sort of pitched in, and we raised a very tiny amount of money, or I should say Amin raised a very tiny amount of money to just get the basics done. But everybody otherwise just kind of did it for the love of it. I personally fronted the costs of the score entirely myself, because it was like, this is not a movie. But I said, I can't not have an orchestra. That's his thing. He like Spielberg and other more kind of old school directors, to him the orchestra is tantamount to the very definition of film music, and even though he has very broad taste and a great appreciation for jazz and pop and all kinds of things, he's a film music nerd like no one I know. I mean, he and I used to go on the radio once a month and do a name that film score competition against each other, and I only beat him once.
Oh wow!
In like a year, and I know film scores pretty well. Like, I have probably 3,000 soundtracks in my physical CD collection, and I know most of them pretty cold because I'm a nerd also. It's like that was like my main hobby for 20 years, and Amin is like that with another 10 years on me, basically. So anyway, he's a brilliant director, and it's funny, for all this emphasis on the music, he has an immense sensitivity to performance and to editing and to cinematography. He has a gorgeous visual sense. So anyway, long story short, we did this student film together, and we just immediately connected. And while I was writing the score, he was in Jordan shooting Abu Raed. Yeah. And so he we then were able to roll straight into that film, and it won Sundance, and it cruised all over the world, and the soundtrack album got a lot of attention. It was kind of the first real film score that I had done. I was very fortunate to get a lot of press and whatever else from that. So yeah, and then the Strangely in Love was this very Chaplin-esque, very special film. I actually have a cameo in the movie, a speaking role in the movie, it's always nerve-wracking when we've screened it for people, and I have to sit there and endure my scene with like strangers in the audience. I didn't really anticipate what that would feel like when I agreed to shoot it, and that because I have a very weird scene. It's actually a pretty memorable moment in the movie just because of the weird setup.
Yeah.
But in any case, then The Rendezvous is our latest, which we're still. In fact, I have unread emails that I have gotten while we've been talking here about the film. So that's very much an ongoing project. But the score is basically finished.
Yeah.
Big, giant, grand, old-fashioned orchestral score.
I think I heard bits of it. I think you might have posted a video or two of bits of it. Sounds pretty fantastic.
Little vines. I love. Yeah. It's a great movie. It's like an old-fashioned adventure film, and it's sort of like a Woody Allen romantic comedy. Like,
nice.
and I specifically would call like Woody Allen out because it's a sweet and smart kind of dialogue-based romance film that's about the banter and the dialogue, the kind of exchanges, and not about like wacky scenarios or some hook like the Judd Apatow type comedy that's based around some concept. Whereas I think of Woody Allen's films as much more about the people.
Yeah.
It's just two different flavors of telling a romance story, basically. And this is very much in that Woody Allen vein, except that it's also like North by Northwest grand adventure film.
Yeah.
Or certainly, Indiana Jones kind of thing. And except North by Northwest is a better comparison because the hero played by Stana Katic from Castle, who she's excellent in the movie. She's just excellent.
Yeah.
She's not a hero. She's like in every woman who gets pulled into a situation that's bigger than she, anticipated. So it's one of those North by Northwest kind of I'm on the run, but I'm just some random person kind of stories. So it was really fun to just go big, but go sweet. The score is actually quite jazzy and has a lot of the main theme is a waltz, which is ironic because Assassin's Creed is the same way. Assassin's Creed is lots and lots of waltzes.
Yeah.
And I was laughing when we were doing The Rendezvous because I was like, apparently waltzes are just my 2015 thing. There's a great big waltz in This Gaming Life also that does it have guns,
Yes.
does it have guns. And so it's just this recurring element for me this year. So I guess now I have to figure out, I got to go write a waltz for Absu.
That's one of your next forays along with the Banner Saga 2. Sort of looking forward to.
Yes, sir. Yep, exactly. Both of those should be coming next year.
That's awesome.